Pollinator talk. It's good to have you here this evening. It's a beautiful evening. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Lundgren. He's a hoot. He kind of says it how it is, and you know, it's one of them things. You either like it or you don't. But the bottom line is, and the take-home message is, I always like to stay positive, and there's a sense of awareness out there, and the good news is we can fix some of these things, and that's the good news. But I want to talk to you a little bit about pollinators, and an estimated 60 to 80% of the world's 250,000 flowering plants depend on pollinators. Animals, mostly insects, for pollination. When you think about agriculture, there's 87 of the world's 124 top crops are animal pollinated and insect pollinated. So you can put that into perspective. That's pretty important. You got roughly 35% of the global crop production is dependent on pollination by animals or insects. The plant pollination is essential to human health, to a healthy environment, the global food web, and as Dr. Lundgren stated, the biodiversity and the protection of the biodiversity. You look at it being a cattle rancher. I'm a rancher myself. Some of the alfalfa we grow, of course, pollination is important for that. Maybe not so much on a year like this where the water is a little bit limited, but we can get higher yields and stuff like that the more pollinators we have. Chad Thorson is the district technician from Burleigh County, and he's going to tell you about what are the pollinators and some of those type things. So,
thanks, Darrell. Like Darrell said, I'm Chad. Fairly new here, but I don't know. This afternoon, we spent the afternoon with Dr. Lundgren, and it was really interesting, talking about the different bugs and the diversity. And pollinators is kind of a buzzword, if you will. Literally, it you know, there's a big emphasis on it, and rightly so, because it you know, so many things depend on these pollinators in our cropping system and fruit production. And there's many different kinds, and that was one thing that I learned today, that you know, that they can be just minute, tiny, to, you know, like a big bumblebee. And bees are one of the main pollinators. And when you think of bees, you think of the big bumblebee, but like as that poster there displays, you know, there's many different kinds of bees, large and small, and even flies that resemble bees. But anyway, I guess there can be flies, beetles, moths, butterflies, hummingbirds. There's many different kinds, and out of those species, you know, many different kinds of those. And you know, just the other day, as far as the bees go, the diverse in their species, walking out into a sweet clover field with some alfalfa on a prairie, on the edge of a prairie, and just there was many different kinds of bees. We just walked in there, and there was probably 3 different kinds buzzing around and landed on our arms that were, you know, it really blew me away as far as, you know, the different kinds, because mainly people just think of the honeybee.
like anything, like you and I and everything, pollinating insects have 2 basic requirements. They need a source of food, and they need a place to live and lay their eggs. As you kind of know already, most flowers offer sugary nectar and or nutritious pollen to attract the floral visitors. That's one of nature's ways. Bees are unusual. Like Chad said, we've seen today some flies that want to be bees. why, I didn't put two and two together. There's a lot of things I don't put together, so I wasn't surprised by that. But, and Dr. Lundgren asked the question, why would a fly want to look like a bee? Well, it's all about predator-prey, and it just makes sense. I always thought that those actually were bees. We used to call them sweat bees, but they're actually flies, which is interesting. But bees actually provide a nest for their offspring, so they not only feed on the plant, but also gather and transport the pollen. And that's the major reason why they're particularly efficient and important pollinators. Your pollinator habitat should have a diversity of plants and be able to bloom at different times. That's key. Pollinating insects require a place to lay their eggs. Butterflies and moths generally lay their eggs on or by the host plant by which the caterpillars will feed. So they're always close by. And of course, many plants have attracted to evolve bees, which is another thing we don't nearly think about. Nearly 70% of all bees nest underground. And we had the discussion today about a gopher in our high tunnel. And of course, I'm a rancher from northeast Burleigh County. Of course, you don't think of gophers as being that beneficial. But the burrows and things, they do provide a place for these burrowing bees. Especially probably those smaller type 13 stripers, as we call them, that don't make a mess and do all that. But something to think about. Nesting habitat is crucial to be towards the food source. Obviously, if you're a bee, the further you have to travel, the more pitfalls you might run into. And so you want your food source close to where you live. The forage range of native bees is anywhere from 50 feet up to a half a mile. And of course, your non-native bees, which I think most or a lot of them are. We have a lot of bee sets up at the ranch, like 5 different sets, and I believe them are all non-native bees because they're tougher. We're starting to use hybrid vigor like we have with cattle. We do it with bees, and that brings up a funny story. I mentioned Dr. Lundgren's blog, and he got some bees in, and they were some Africanized type bees, and they were brutal. They chase them around the farm. And of course, one of them, he had a hole in one of his masks, and one of them got in his mask, and he got bit in the face 10 times in a matter of seconds. I mean, they're just awful. And of course, now what he's done is he destroyed the queens and the breeders of those bees, and he's brought in some tamer bees. So probably like taking a Solaire and crossbreeding it with a Hereford. Although Solaire's maybe not are that far. They always used to be known for a little high temperament in cattle. So just a little story. Chad's going to mention, that we're standing in some trees, and he's going to talk about trees and pollinators.
Okay, trees can be critical for providing habitat, a different source for bees. And we're talking about pollinators, and pollinators isn't just bees, but we're kind of concentrating on those because of they are the majority, and I guess that I just wanted to state that. And so when you're thinking about pollinators in trees or shrubs, they can provide a large, because they get big. They're bigger than, a little forb or whatever. So they can provide a larger habitat for those different pollinators. And it can be, some trees can provide up to 550 different ones. And it's a big deal. So in North Dakota, our pollinator season, it goes anywhere from late April to early October. That can kind of change with weather patterns. But some of the earliest flowering shrubs or trees, or pollinators, I guess, are trees and shrubs. So that could be the first food source that those pollinators see in the early spring when they come out of hibernation. So it can be very, very vital for their survival. And in North Dakota, we have a pretty harsh climate. It's pretty hard for us to grow trees and shrubs, or I guess I should say certain varieties. So we're pretty limited as far as what we want to see. I guess one of the big words that I come away with is diversity in everything, in your crop rotations and your biology, and in your species, in your flowering species, to provide food for those pollinators. You want an early season, a middle season, and a late season. And with our brutal climate, it's really hard to get all three. And the earliest one is pretty simple. I mean, that's pretty easy. There's a ton of our varieties here that can provide that. Then you get into the middle, and then the list just goes really short. And late, I mean, you're very, very few. If I think there's one or two. So on your handout there's a list of our early, middle, and late blooming forage shrubs, trees, and so that's what you're looking to provide, a little diversity for that, to ensure that something's blooming to feed the pollinators all season. What can a person do to enhance the pollinator habitat? There's a few things. There's probably more than what I have, but these are just a few general ones. One is to recognize the pollinators and pollinator habitats that you already have on your farm or yard or wherever on your property, and to not destroy them. And into like ground nesting bees, like Darrell talked about, is the majority of their homes, and so tilling it up is obviously, tilling up that soil is going to really hurt that. So that's one. Two, adapt existing production and land management practices to avoid causing harm to your pollinators that are already there. And that could be, your pesticide use, just being really careful on that. And, if you see a bug or something, that you think is going to hurt, and look at the whole picture. Look at the whole, is that going to affect the next bug that, that might provide food for, or, things like that. And think in terms of unused land around fields, buildings, and yards, and enhancing those. Maybe you want to, I guess Dr. Lundgren talked about on his farm where he has sweet clover patches through his fields that provide a huge habitat for pollinators and all kinds of beneficial bugs. So you have, sweet clover, alfalfa, things like that. Just kind of think of what you can do to really enhance that. So once you've developed these areas and you have that, what can you do not to inadvertently kill what you have? I guess I kind of said that already, but one example would be, say you have a linden tree in your front yard and over your driveway, and the branches hang over your driveway, and at times aphids can get in there and they feed on that linden tree, and you can come out and see that your car is parked underneath that tree and the aphids are eating that tree and they're secreting sap and it's all over your car. Well, that's really annoying, and you can say, well, I'm gonna fix those aphids, and I'm gonna go spray them. But one thing about the linden tree is that it blooms a lot later than the majority. Actually, I think they're blooming right now, and so say bees are feeding on that linden tree, and there can be all kinds of beneficial species up there. Well, if you're just going in there to kill aphids, well, you could wipe out the whole bee population in there and kill hundreds and hundreds of, if not thousands, of beneficial insects. So I guess with that, it's just something to keep in mind.
In conclusion, not to sound like a Debbie Downer, but we know that the bees are in decline. The habitat is in decline. we've changed the landscape. Dr. Lundgren talked about monocultural farming and things like that. The good news is, though, again, is that can all be fixed. It can be changed. The fact that we're all here tonight and here to listen and discuss things is proof of that. The Menoken Farm, again, we get lots and lots of people coming through here, and we have these discussions all the time, and so it's easy for me to stay positive and upbeat. They're just facing a host of challenges. They've got a lot of diseases and things like that, but again, we can do some things. It's important to manage. I think that the big take home, even from the whole 20 minutes here, is manage what you have, even if it's a small acreage, a third of an acre, or be cognizant and be aware of what you have and work from there. You'll go over to there and talk to Dr. Lundgren, and you'll see that we've set up these pollinator or these bee type things, and it can be as easy as putting a post in the ground and drilling holes in it for bee habitat. And so you don't need 20 acres, you don't need 10 acres, or 5 or 1,000. You know, you can do it on very small scale and very small, and you know, move the needle in the right direction. It's an awareness, and I think that's why we're all here. The Xerxes Foundation has an excellent publication. You can Google that, and it tells you how to enhance pollinator habitat. Again, it's not that difficult to do, and you know, hopefully moving forward, now that we're armed with the awareness, education is power, information is power, we can maybe make somewhat of a difference. So with that, we'd entertain any questions or comments that you may have about the pollinators, or we could, yes?
You're saying moths can pollinate too?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean these white moths that fly around on top of the cabbage and all that?
The cabbage moths, yes.
I don't
They're
know
bad.
if
They're
there's cabbage in there out there.
yeah.
So maybe they're good, huh?
Yeah.
And then yeah, and
No, it's surprising, and I'm, you know, back in the day, I took some entomology, and of course that was many moons ago. And today, spending 3 hours with Dr. Lundgren, I tell you, just what's out there is amazing, and that's the other thing. It's just unbelievable, the things that are out there, and so we have to take all that into consideration, and you know, when we move towards maybe trying to eliminate a pest, but
just to throw in there, water. They all need a water source also,
right.
because you know, they don't. Some of them don't travel very far, so they'll need a water source. That definitely helps. So.
Any other questions,
So
comments?
where can I get a pollinator mix, like a Chesapeake or a...
Yes,
wherever?
they're all aware of that stuff now. I'll talk a little bit about establishment, and it's
We tried to plant some and
Yeah.
I didn't do it right. So
No, I tell
I'm
you,
wondering if we
but-
should just do it in
but don't become discouraged, because over the years we've put quite a few of them in. It's not easy, and you have to have the right conditions, and you have to have the right scenario, and it's easy to get discouraged. To be honest with you, over the years we've had more failures than successes, but patience is a key, and time, and a little management, because those forbs and those type and flowering plants and those natives, they're not easy to establish once they've been taken out of the landscape. It's just not natural for them, and so that is a bit discouraging. But you can get mixes. There's lots of places that'll help you, and there's, again, the awareness is out there, the information is out there. So anything else? I think that's the time we got to go. But
Thank you.
thank you for having us.